And welcome back. We have with us for our final segment the esteemed panel of Dr. Joel Cervantes, who's a neurosurgeon. We also have with us Dr. Tulio Mendez, who's a pediatric neurologist at the Northern Medical Plaza. And we also have teacher at Stella Maris, one of my favorite institutions, the Stella Maris School, Sherane?
Yes,
I got that right. Yeah. Sherane Belisle. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah.
So, Belize Brain Awareness Society. We're celebrating World Epilepsy Day. First of all, could you talk to us about the society? What is the Belize Brain Awareness Society, and what are its aims and objectives?
Well, it is an organization which basically it was set up as to provide awareness, provide education on neurologic disease, on brain diseases, and also in one way assist some of the patients that have brain problems. We know that any or majority of brain problems when it comes to cause, right? And when it comes to the effect that it causes within the entire family, it is something very, very serious. So this society started to see the necessity of it in our country.
Yes.
Yeah. There's such a large number of conditions that can affect your brain, and I think this is one we really don't talk about enough. Epilepsy, which in common Belizean words we've called fits for a long time. Let me just get a sense of understanding what it is and how common it is as well. Who wants to take that?
Well, epilepsy is the most frequent neurologic disease within the young age population, let's say less than 20 years. And then it starts to present itself at an older age also. But it is one of the most frequent. It is calculated more or less 1% of our population supposed to have epilepsy. So if we're talking about, let's say, 390,000 or 400,000 our population, more or less we are going to have about 4,000 patients with epilepsy. So it's very frequent.
But why? Why is this? What causes it?
What causes? Yeah.
Different causes. Some people can have the genetics that makes them propense in the family line, the bloodstream. We want to use more basic, easy words. That they're propense to getting epilepsy. They have an aunt, they have an uncle, a mother or father.
Genetics.
This genetics, it gets passed down. It's not the most frequent type. There are other situations whereby people, perhaps at birth, have had a condition whereby they don't breathe the way they should at childbirth. So the brain is kind of starved of oxygen. That's something we see pretty much here in the society. Not a lot, but compared to other countries, we do find it out over time. Conditions, you can be born with abnormalities in how the brain is shaped, the surface of the brain, the architecture of the brain, and that can lead to improper electrical signals, which is epilepsy. We can have brain tumors, we can have parasites in the brain, we can have a condition called hydrocephalus, which is waterhead. And one that is not really talked about many times is what we call post-traumatic epilepsy, which means that a person, for example, has had a traffic accident or fallen off a tree, trauma. And, initially they go perhaps to the hospital or wherever, and nothing apparently shows up. And then a couple of weeks, months, or years afterwards, the person will have an issue. And just to let you all understand basically what epilepsy is, I usually tell my patients that our brain works like on a 110 system.
110.
Right, like I call it 110, just to explain.
You mean electricity?
Electricity
Okay.
wise. Right? I'm not an electrician. No, I'm not an electrician, right?
Okay.
But I try to give a very
Yeah.
crude type of example to people, and I tell them that basically epilepsy is you go to 220.
There's a
we're at
surge.
220 outlet for an AC, right? And regular lighting is 110. So when we have that spike that goes up electrically, that's when we have a seizure.
Okay.
Well, actually, our brain, as well our professors used to say, if we have gathered all the electrical activity, we would be able to light a bulb. Okay, so
Wow.
our brain really works with voltage, but it's microvolts.
Okay.
Okay, it's microvolts.
So I've heard all the reasons as to why a person would have these sudden surges, or why they would be prone to these sudden surges. But what actually causes it? What makes somebody go, and this is, I guess, where Sherane, who you live with epilepsy, can share your experience. What actually makes a person go from normal range to suddenly in the midst of a seizure?
Well, in our country, we have a lot of people that suffer from head trauma. I mean, road traffic accidents are very frequent. Dr. Cervantes was just talking about, for example, in children that are born during pregnancy with lack of oxygen.
Yeah.
It is very frequent. Our percentage is supposed to be much higher than other countries. Okay? But yes, head trauma is a frequent cause. And I think Ms. Belisle here could relate to us how
Tell
exactly
us
it
your
started.
experience.
Okay. 4 years ago, I started to feel different. My body started to feel different. And I didn't know what was happening. I remember going home and feeling really out of it, terrible. And I decided to take a shower. I thought that this would bring me back. I went under the shower, I wet my head and everything. But as I was in there, I realized that it was just getting worse. It wasn't getting better. So I came out of the shower and I went in my bed. And I laid there. I woke up the following day. I was weak and everything. And I still decided that I was going to work because I didn't understand what was happening. And I caught the bus. And I sat in the first seat of the bus. And so I was able to see in the mirror. And as I sat there, I felt this sudden change in my body again. And I looked at myself and I watched my face slowly started to droop. And my sister advised me to go to the hospital, and I did that. But when I went there, no doctor, none of them were able to help me to say what exactly was happening. And so I was sent home, and I went home again, and again this feeling came on. And I went back to the hospital. And I tried explaining what was happening. They asked me if I took anything. I told them I took a viral grip, so it was the effect of the viral grip. But I went home and the same thing happened again. And it was the 4th time when my family decided to rush me down to the hospital because they were seeing what was happening to me. And nobody could understand what it was. I would suddenly get so weak, I couldn't move. They spoke to me, I couldn't respond. I was just right there. It was just, sometimes I had a blank stare. But the feeling, it was just like I could not move, I could not do anything, I could not respond to anybody. And so when they brought me down in the night, when I got to the hospital, as soon as we arrived, I had a seizure. And so it was then that the doctors saw me, and it was in that way that they were able to say, okay, we know what's wrong. And it was from there that I started to see a neurologist. I was placed on medication, and my life changed because the things that I used to do, I was so afraid to do them. I was afraid to climb the stairs, afraid to swim, afraid to be out anywhere by myself because I did not know when I was going to have a seizure. I did not know the extent to which it was going to be. And so I lived a sheltered life, you would say. They don't want to go anywhere. They don't want to be without somebody. And years, it's 4 years now. I'm proud to say that I had to learn how to deal with it. I had to learn what triggered the seizures. I had to learn how to deal with it if I feel it coming on, you know, to find myself, to be somewhere comfortable. It was just
A part of your life.
yeah.
Were you able
that
to
changed.
identify what was the cause in terms of, did you have an accident before? Was it genetics? You know, were you able to identify where?
Well,
and
in
why?
my case, I was in a traffic accident when I was 14 years old. And I have scarring on my brain, on the right side of my brain. And so, and I also have it in my family as well. So for me, Yeah, it's double.
So it could be either one.
Yes.
Yeah, but most probably the
The
accident.
doctors,
right?
yes, that's what
Most
they're
probably
saying.
the accident.
But
But
from
you could say that there are
14 to your
factors.
adulthood, that's when
risk
it started to
factors that-
develop?
Yes.
Amazing.
Well, there's a reason for that. That basically our brain is like a jello, kind of feels like this. The consistency in kids who are 1 year of age or less, it feels like this, as long as there are no brain infections or anything swelling there. And basically, the brain is going to work with electricity, like Dr. Marcatullo said, and it also has a system of juices. We use special words, the hormones and neurotransmitters and neuromodulators. Forget the fancy word. It is electricity with special chemicals. And the brain has a lot of elasticity and will prevent most times a person having any type of a seizure. Like when she had the accident at 14 years, she grew into adulthood, and for some reason that we won't know, if it was stress or perhaps she had not had her regular meals or tired, sleepy, whatever reason, it reached a point that her defense mechanisms were overridden, and she started physically or clinically or neurologically, like we say, to present the signs of the seizure.
Can I ask you a very basic?
Her one is very, very, very peculiar because you could see how she describes the entire scenario. So it starts in an area, specific area. It is what we call the partial, a focal, just one area of the brain. So most of the times, even she will describe it. She could have the seizures, and you are. I'm aware. She's aware of everybody what is happening. Okay?
I'm aware of what you are saying. I just can't respond.
Okay.
That's got to feel terrible.
Yeah.
So there are two different types, general types of seizures. The focal, that starts in one part of the brain, and all of our functions, I mean, that we feel, that we see, that we hear, if that area is where the electrical activity comes from, that is how you are going to present it. And then afterwards, the person could lose consciousness or could stop, be aware of his surroundings.
Is it that you have one seizure and you're epileptic, or is it somebody who has a frequent disposition to having seizures?
Yeah, epilepsy is, the definition of epilepsy is that you're supposed to have 2 or more seizures, unprovoked. Okay. For example, sometimes children could have seizures due to fever, and those are febrile seizures.
Or
and
diabetics have seizures sometimes too.
Well, diabetics could have seizures due to the glucose.
Yeah.
Okay, but they are not epileptic.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is a metabolic problem. When there is a problem on the brain, that there is a scar, or due to the neurotransmitters, and that person presents 2 or more, then we classify them as epileptic patients.
One of the things I'm curious about is babies tend to fall a lot. You turn your away and you roll off the bed and they fall. It happens a lot. It happened to me a lot. It had a different effect.
And you're still alive
I'm
to talk
still
about
alive.
it.
But does that factor into, and you were talking about the difference between the cartilage, well, I guess,
Not cartilage, the consistency of the brain. Right.
And you compared it to cartilage of the nose and the ear.
How it feels.
Is it, when you're that age, are you more resistant to the impact and the trauma of it? And is that the reason why you tend to have a little bit of it when you are a child? Because I see a lot of people who experience it as a child, and then in adulthood, they're good. And then later on in life again, then they have it again. What accounts for that break in between?
Well, children, the brain of children is different than the brain of adults, no?
It's much better.
And the brain, much better, definitely. I mean, the quantity of neurons, quantity of brain cells is much higher. We are talking that is the age that we have the highest quantity of neurons, of brain cells, and then it starts to wear off. But they have more plasticity, just like how Dr. Cervantes was talking, that it could mold itself, okay? And in children, yes, let's say, for example, the signs, when there is trauma, when there is a trauma, what we would look for. The 2 most important is, did the child went to sleep? Did they have a tendency to sleep? Or did the child vomit? Because when there is a problem within the brain after trauma, there is swelling, and children, or all of us, would tend to vomit, okay? So those are 2 signs. But yes, children, their brain tends to, let's say, it's different than adults, and of course they could definitely get cured.
Oh.
So in other words, if you find a child with epilepsy and you find it at an early stage, most conditions of epilepsy, treated properly, they can cure.
What kind of treatment?
Oh.
Medication given for a period of time
Medication.
and being very, very disciplined.
I always thought it was permanent.
No.
Once you-
Nope.
For example, in newborns, during the labor, if they have asphyxia, lack of oxygen
Yeah.
that reaches to the brain, they could have seizures 1 or 2, 3 days. And majority of them, after 6 months, they don't have it. And so the treatment, most of the time, we would be using it for the first 6 months, and then it's gone. So
Okay.
they tend to repair much easier than adults.
And in your case, Sherane, is that the treatment will eventually have you stop having seizures, or yours is different?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm
Yeah.
hoping.
Yeah.
But yeah, I take the medications, but I still do have seizures.
How often do you have seizures?
It all depends on what triggers it. It depends on the type of day that I'm having. Sometimes it's food that trigger the seizure. It's the weather, it's stress. Sometimes it's some smells. It all depends on what it is.
How do you know you're going to have one?
There's this feeling that comes over me. It's a strange feeling, hard to really explain, but it's like the body feels unbalanced. It's not, you don't feel normal, you feel different.
You keep on saying the entire body, and in my own naive way, I thought it would start in the brain, like you have headaches or something that you feel up here, but what you would describe it as a feeling of the entire body.
Yeah. It's not really, not all the time it's the entire body. Sometimes I can feel it. I can feel a tingling or a numbness in my face. I can feel a strange feeling in my hands or somewhere in my body. And that starts to tell me that something is wrong.
In terms
How
of
typical is Sharane's experience in how she describes? I mean, you're so articulate about what you go through. It's amazing. Yeah?
It's a specific type of seizure
Yeah.
that she's having. It's called a partial or a focal seizure, that she's able to realize what is happening, but she cannot respond. In fact, she describes a phase whereby at times she's talking with somebody while she's in this seizure, but she has no recollection of what she's saying. And she comes out of it, and she could have promised or said something afterwards. She would say, I did not say.
Is it that we have a preconditioned idea as to what a seizure is? I'll give an example. Once there was this viral video that went around. It was a news reporter talking, and she just kind of went into like babbling language and then bounced back. And one of the first things people were saying is maybe she had a bit of a seizure right then and there. But it was strange because my perception of what a seizure is someone on the floor kind of kicking and moving around.
Exactly.
Is
That is what comes to when we talk about fits, or when we have fits. Okay, that the person needs to be shaking and falling on the ground. But that is
Foaming.
the generalized type that affects the entire brain, and of course it's going to affect the entire body. But there are certain seizures that start in one particular type of the brain. For example, she says about smell. Okay, she would start to smell something odd, and that is where it's starting, right where we have the ear of our brain that is the one that controls smell, or our vision. I've had children that have seizures that they start to see odd things, or the television just starts to get wide, small, and that is all that they feel. Okay, so it's an area specific of the brain that has that functions, or tinglings. So a seizure is not that they, let's say all seizures are not just falling down
It's not convulsions,
shaking up.
yeah.
That's a convulsion,
Yeah.
right? That is what they call convulsion.
But it can be from minor, I mean, I don't know if you call it minor, it can be just
Yeah,
specific parts of
focal,
your body. That's
partial.
focal that you're talking
Yeah.
about.
So a person could be having a seizure and is just shaking this hand and could be conscious. I think that sometimes it
happens
occurs to
sometimes.
her.
Really?
There are three groups that I just want to mention before I forget that we have to look at very specifically. Children with child abuse, and this is important for social workers and doctors, because many times the frontline person is a doctor or nurse. A child that you suspect is a victim of child abuse, A lot of them, because they've been slammed into a wall, their head, a bed or whatever, they can have an underlying epileptic condition. A second group is that we don't fight with our colleagues in mental health, but the psychiatric nurse practitioners, the psychiatrists, but a lot of patients that have psychiatric symptoms actually have an epileptic condition. So it would be advisable for any mental health expert to send
To rule out.
Yeah. Right? And thirdly, our senior citizens. A lot of senior citizens at times have a form of epilepsy, and which you have to prove versus other conditions, perhaps like a dementia or something. But it's appropriate that if there's a suspicion, they get a proper evaluation.
I wanted to know about support, because I can imagine your loved ones and them feeling, you feel helpless, you feel scared. I can imagine how they feel. From your standpoint, what has been the most important support mechanism? How do people support people who suffer from the condition?
Generally speaking, I don't believe that Belizeans have the education, they're not sensitized about seizures. But for me personally, I have my family. They are a big support group. If at any time I'm having a seizure, I'm not feeling well, they are always there for me. Somebody's always there. I can pick up the phone and I can call any of them and they come running. So if I'm on the bus and I feel that I'm getting sick, I pick up the phone, I call my sister, my dad, somebody, and they come for me. If I'm at home, they help to ensure that I'm in a comfortable position, one that I won't fall. We talk together. My sister, she loves herbs and all of those things, so she tried to find anything
natural medicine
that would
the
help me.
doctors are laughing.
And then they talk to me about it. They asked about how I'm feeling, and I also have my friends who are.
But what about your
aware.
work environment? How open are they to, because that has to be a challenge.
For me, it never was. It's mostly females. I had I still have a principal who is a female, but when I started with the seizures, I had a different principal, and so I spoke to her, and she was very understanding. My colleagues were very understanding as well, and so I just explained to them my condition and how the best way how to help me if at work, if I do have a seizure at work.
What do we do when somebody's having a seizure? What should we do and not do?
Well, I can't speak for the doctors. I don't know what they will say, but for me, the best thing for me is to ensure that I don't fall, that I don't get hurt. So to put me in a comfortable position, just time it to see that I'm not in a seizure for too long, because if I'm in it for too long, then you need to take me to the hospital.
What's too long?
More than five minutes.
More than 5 minutes.
But 5 minutes is
long.
Right? Because when the person is having the seizure, we know it is an image and it is emotional, and one needs to time it. It is very important. Okay, so one needs to control ourselves and start it this time. Okay, how much? Because almost always that seizure is going to be less than 1 minute and it's gone. All right. So we need to protect the person, of course, that it doesn't cause no trauma. We need to try to see that everything is well loosened and be able to.
What about protecting
breathe?
the tongue? We always hear that one. I mean, I'm really showing my ignorance here to the situation, but I can say this.
Before it was something that was used to be done.
Okay.
They put even a spoon. Just imagine. I mean, many years ago, but that is not indicated. Okay, because the force is so much that they could even break their jaw, their teeth. Okay?
So you don't need to put anything in the mouth.
No.
Don't put your hand.
Don't
put your hand, even if you wrap it in don't put your hand. They'll bite it off.
Have there been any instances of fatalities arising from, not necessarily hitting their head from falling from seizure, but
from the seizure itself?
From the seizure itself.
It's very rare. Okay. It has been reported, yes, it's very rare. Because remember, within the brain, our heart is also, the rhythm of our heart is determined up there, okay? So if that area where we have the impulses to our heart, if that area is irritated and the seizure is so much, that could affect, it cause arrhythmias. But also the inadequate quantity of oxygen, if that person is unable to stop having the seizure less than 5 minutes, it is an urgency. We need to take that person to the
Yeah.
Remember, quite simply, the brain is the motherboard and the CD-ROM of the body, the computer. So this is where all the signals come from. So this is disrupted in a very violent fashion. Can it eventually lead to death? Yes. Unfortunately, people who do not have a proper diagnosis and proper treatment are left very disabled. We can see them at times walking around the streets, and we take them for psychiatric patients, and they're not. They're epileptic patients that end up having secondarily psychiatric symptoms, and they become outcasts in their family and outcasts in society.
So, what are the direct threats of a person having a seizure who's epileptic? Is it just the physical damage?
The important thing is never to have a seizure. Each time a person has a seizure, you're destroying brain cells.
Oh.
Yeah, that is
So you're trying to
important.
prevent.
So-
Having epilepsy, taking your medication, knowing your triggers is really to prevent your brain from going through the surge.
Yes, but also to prevent that it gets worse. Because there is an effect that it's called the kindling effect. It's just that the areas around where it is originating, it's going to be affected. So that those areas, the seizure is going to be worse.
Yeah.
So it is important to have the adequate treatment as to just maintain that area controlled and for it to eventually
Do we
disappear.
have the proper protocol to deal with epileptic attacks? Because I'm here doing some math. If somebody's having a seizure, an epileptic fit, and I'm there observing it, I'm telling me 5 minutes has gone more than that, and I might live maybe half an hour from a hospital.
Yeah, like
And when I do get to the hospital, the staff is like, they have other priorities, gunshot people coming in. Is there a protocol in place, and would it assist, if there is none, for there to be a protocol in place to deal specifically with epileptic patients?
At the emergency, most of our hospitals, they do have the protocol. Okay, so the medications are straightforward, and the timing is very important for those treatments to be given. Of course, when it comes to the treatment of the patients, there are many of them that are not available. Okay, and Ms. Belisle could give you a...
What's your plan? What's your family plan when you have a seizure? Because you said you do live far away from the hospital.
I live half an hour away from the city, and so when it gets to that point, they just need to rush me to the hospital. It's just to get in the vehicle and to bring me down.
I would even wait the 5 minutes if I were, because if it's a false, if it's not a false, if it's one that's not like threatening, then just go back into the house. But if it is one, then I don't lose the 5 minutes. That's imprudent?
But no, the protocol is, as I told you, the image is something that really gives that emotional, and
It's
we need to do
scary.
something,
Yeah.
and it's scary. Okay, but the protocol is, you have somebody that has a seizure, you need to protect them, you need to lay them down. It's going to be okay, almost 99%. Okay, so it's going to be okay. Don't rush and, we're going to take him into
No
the
panic.
hospital. No, don't panic. Okay, that
what I
is
told
going to be
people.
resolved, right? And if it starts to reach 3 minutes, 4 minutes, well then yes, we need to rush to the hospital. But the majority, it's just disappears alone.
But we also need to have a bit of a cultural change, because I have had patients come and say, well, the way you treat me, the way Dr. Marcatuli treat me is so fine, and at times we're having problems in the public arena. We have to understand that at times our public institutions, they're swamped with work. It's ridiculous for somebody to go as an emergency because they have a toothache they've had for 2 weeks, but they haven't gone to the dentist. So an epileptic patient, of course, will be much more important than somebody who has a toothache. So we have a cultural problem. Common sense, a gunshot victim, is even more
Taboo,
important than
yeah.
the epileptic patient. But at times we have seen that and not only in public arena, it happens in private too, that medical staff at times kind of get annoyed because when the patient is brought in, nothing apparently is there. But I think it's just a matter of the people who write and enforce the policies. It's education. You educate your staff. They have to be patient, because when people come in, the majority of people who come in are non-medical people. So you come in, you're scared because your loved one has had a seizure for 5 minutes or more, or maybe it's only 30 seconds. But they should have the patience to listen and to analyze and decide what to do.
So, how do you cope now, 4 years later, with living with epilepsy and having to continue? I'm sure you keep on educating people all the time. You said you keep on telling people to don't panic. What is it like for you?
Well, it's fairly normal, I would say now.
Yeah.
It has been some years, and I've learned to deal with it, and I live a normal life. If I'm going to do anything, I would say not risky, but you know, in that sense, then there's someone there with me. Like if I'm going swimming or something like that, I go to work every day. There are days that I have bad days,
Yeah.
and for those days, I just need to stay at home and rest. I just need to sleep.
Do you take extra precautions, like where you'd sit on the bus? I imagine is important, or like I appreciate you saying you wouldn't go swimming alone because what if something happens there?
With everything that you do, it changes. You have to be careful.
Okay.
And so that's just the way I live my life. I try to live it as normal as possible, but at the same time being careful because of my condition.
Yeah.
And so I live every day.
She's saying something very, very important. She's living, but she's being productive. Okay,
Yeah.
she's being productive, and most of the time, when the idea has always been there that people with epilepsy, they have their disability, or they have a problem with being able to work. No, Miss Belisle, I mean, working
Yes.
at
The
Stella
wonderful
Maris,
kids at Stella
you know,
Maris.
Yes, yes.
working at
Yeah.
Stella Maris, it's not
Yeah,
easy.
that's a lot of work.
My respect to the people that work there. So she has been able and capable of doing that job. All right. Apart, well, she does have her epilepsy, and she has been able to, in one way or another, control it.
Yeah.
And she is taking her medication constantly.
World Epilepsy Day was yesterday.
Yesterday, yes.
How did the world celebrate it, and how did
Well,
we
most of the
celebrate it?
majority really by education, by bringing out epilepsy, how it is that it affects people. But epilepsy has always, many of the time, been stigmatized. Before, families didn't used to take out their children because, oh no, they don't want to see him having a seizure. They're going to think that he's crazy or he's doing this. But it's just an area of the brain whereby the electrical activity comes from. So Epilepsy Awareness Day is basically celebrated on providing education, and in one way or another, in some countries, well, they would get funds as to help people with epilepsy, because sometimes the studies are expensive, especially right now. Well, we have the MRI, which is a little bit expensive, $1,500 for an MRI, which most of the time people with epilepsy is supposed to have. That is the most indicated study, but sometimes they cannot do it.
And the medication, how affordable is the medication, or accessible?
Well, in my case, I purchased some of the medication. It's not all that expensive, I would say. And I also get medication from the hospital, from the pharmacy.
Okay, awesome.
I think quite simply, instead of buying beers and cigarettes and sweets, get your medication.
You have to prioritize and know
Get
what's
your-
important.
Right.
You also have to be, I guess, strict with your health as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a part that I still struggle with.
I was going to ask, because you said something about food as a trigger. What kind of food triggers your seizures?
For me, well, I've pinpointed pineapple, cucumber,
Whoa.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Grapefruit.
Maybe acid.
yeah.
It could be acid.
I've pinpointed
So
those.
it's an individual basis that people recognize what may.
Most of the time we would think about, any food that causes
Sugars.
some excitability, for example, caffeine, okay, or Coke, right? We try to avoid that, or lights. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With,
pulsing
or
lights.
sometimes the lights, okay, or now the
Screens of phones.
screen of phones, okay, the cellular in the night, that they would be watching it. That could cause seizures, right? That could trigger seizures, and it was seen in Japanese. That's where it started, whereby they start to see that there is a photoreactivity with so much changes of light. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And just last bit, because we are out of time. What do we do if somebody's having a convulsion in front of us?
The first thing is it's always making sure that they don't choke on themselves. So
Okay.
don't try to hold their feet up. Just lie them down on the side, left side, right side. If they have on a bow tie and necktie, their shirt is buttoned up, loosen. I mean, don't loosen all the way down. The belt is not too tight. Just make sure, if you lie them on their back flatly, they could bronchoaspirate, fluids from the mouth can go to the lung. So basically on this side, make sure they don't bang their head if it's the type of seizure where they're moving violently, and just wait. Just wait to make the person get through it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Just a little bit with marijuana and epilepsy. Okay, it has been stated that marijuana is being used with certain types of epilepsy. I just want to really have it clear that it's not all epilepsy. For example,
I mean,
right?
as a treatment.
As a treatment, yes. Okay, the cannabidiol, it's the extract of the marijuana, not the smoking.
Yeah.
Okay, so that people be aware.
Interesting.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here and helping us understand more about epilepsy. And Sherane, thank you for sharing your story.
Yes.
We're going to go ahead and take a final break, and we'll be back in a few, so stay tuned.